All right, so today is a work day, but on work days, it's a time for people to ask questions, to get feedback from me, get feedback from your peers in class. And it's also a time for me to show you things that maybe we didn't go over in the demonstration. So there might be some sort of a technique that you want to perform that you haven't learned yet. So one technique we're going to go over today is a clipping mask. So I had a couple of students want to know, how do you cut out shapes or visual elements from a photograph in Adobe Illustrator? Well, when you're in a vector art program, you can't just start erasing a photographic picture because it doesn't work with pixels. It does not erase pixels. Like Photoshop. In Photoshop, you would just take the eraser tool and just start erasing the pixels that you don't want in that scene. But in Illustrator, the approach is a little bit different. You'll have to use what's called a clipping mask. And so a clipping mask can be made by just creating a path to outline whatever content it is you want to keep or get rid of. Now, it doesn't actually get rid of the photograph. It just makes a mask so you can't see it anymore. So I'm going to use the pen tool to create a path that I'm going to trace all around this man. And the bowl that he's holding with the beans, and just kind of clip out the entire background so I could use them for something else if I wanted to. And so if you've never used the pen tool before, this is going to be a new experience. You might get a little frustrated at first. Most students do when they're learning this tool for the first time, but it is the most important tool you can ever learn to use in any computer graphics program. If you plan on being good at computer graphics, you better get used to working with paths. So I'm just going to start by creating an anchor point by clicking. You can see I've made an anchor point right here. That's what that little blue square is. And when I move to another location and click and drag, I'm creating a curved anchor point. And I'm going to create another curved one up here. I'm just trying to follow the folds and the curves of his shirt. And so I'm making these short little movements of moving the pen and creating anchor points, and specifically curved anchor points. I'm going to zoom in and let you see this process a little bit better. So like I'm about to outline his ear, and so I want to have lots of curved anchor points so that I can adjust and manipulate that line path however I want to. So to do that, when I create an anchor point by clicking with my mouse, I also keep the mouse button engaged while I drag away from the anchor point. And that will create anchor points that give me directional handles, which are these little things right here, these little blue handles that stick out, that will allow you to have total control over your path and its curves and the direction that it takes and its entire appearance. Now notice that I have this weird filling in thing going on in the background. That's because I have my pen tool set to fill mode. If you look over here in the tool window, you can see that the fill color is on and the stroke color is off. Well, I'm going to toggle that. So I'm just going to hit this little button right here that allows me to swap the fill and the stroke. And now I just have a line that I can see, and that makes it much easier to be able to trace my subject. I'm also being very sparing with the amount of anchor points that I create. I don't want to be too timid in creating my line path and having anchor points just, every step of the way. Otherwise, you'll have a gazillion points on the line that need to be edited. And so the point with the directional handles with these curved anchor points is that those directional handles can do all the heavy lifting for you to go back and readjust those line segments. So right now my goal is basically just tracing out his profile or his silhouette. I'm going to do that the best that I can in the first pass. But I'm always going to have to go back and do some fine tuning before I actually finish the clipping process. So you can also see me kind of zooming in really close in some areas. That's something else that you're going to need to do if you're going to be good at this tool when you're tracing things. There's a lot of zooming in and out, because you really want to be able to make sure that you're following the silhouette of your subject. This method is also the same for Adobe InDesign. So when you work with objects or photographs in that program, they can either exist in a square or rectangular object frame, or sorry, I'm trying to talk and draw at the same time. It's never a good idea. And I lost my train of thought. What was I saying? Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, so in InDesign, you can have an object that lives in an object frame that's square, rectangular, or you can customize the frame of that object by editing its object frame path and customize its shape to fit, you know, an element within a photographic composition. So the same rules apply in programs like InDesign as what you see here in Illustrator to create a clipping mask. His other finger might be back here. Actually, I didn't need to do that with his hand at all. I should have just stopped at his torso carries on down here. I should have done that. So I almost have him traced out using the pen tool. And once I come around full circle and close this path, notice that when I bring my cursor up here to the first anchor point, you get that little circle next to that anchor point. That means that I'm getting ready to close that path. And so now this guy has an outline that outlines him perfectly, almost perfect. And then I'm going to jump to another tool called the Direct Selection tool. Oh, bless you. And then we're going to just come back and kind of fine tune some of these paths. So like around his glasses, I can see that this path needs to come in a little more, so I can pick up that anchor point and move it. And just get a much cleaner kind of selection. And you can see how I move these directional handles to adjust the path, the line path. So anchor points will pick up the path and move it to a new spot, but directional handles will allow you to manipulate the path in between 2 points. I can grab the handle this way, or I can just select the path and just kind of gently pull it out and reshape it. Trying to make it look like his head's not being chopped off up there. That's going to be kind of tricky. And then once I get finished editing my path and making sure that it outlines everything just perfectly, then I'm ready to do the clipping mask. Oops. All right, so now I'm gonna use this path that I just created. If you look at my layers window, I have an image layer, so that was just where I placed him in the document, and he landed on the first layer. I locked that layer just so I could draw on top of him, and then on the next sub layer is where I drew this path. So you can see how the path is all outlining his body and the little bowl that's holding the beans, and we have him all outlined from his background. And now we want to drop the background out and just leave him. Well, this is how you do it. First of all, you have to make sure that your image and your path are right next to each other in the layer window. I'm going to unlock the image layer because it won't work if it's locked. And you have to make sure that your path is a closed path so that it comes around full circle and closes on the first anchor point that you created. And so now we have what's called a closed path. And now we're ready to create a clipping mask effect. So to do that, you will just simply select both of these elements. So I didn't just select both layers or sub-layers. I selected both of those objects. You can tell that they're selected because they're both highlighted blue, the image and the path. And you can also see the little selection buttons in the layer window, those little blue boxes. Those are letting you know that the content on those sublayers is selected. And when it's in that state, then you are ready to do a clipping mask. And you will perform a clipping mask by going to Object in the menu bar, and you'll go down here to Path. Nope, sorry. Go down here to Clipping Mask. Object, Clipping Mask, and then Make. And it drops out that background. Now, that background is still there, just to be clear. It didn't go anywhere, all right? And let me just demonstrate. So I'm going to use, remember that when you're editing a path of any kind, you use the direct selection tool in Illustrator, okay? It might even still be called the direct selection tool in Photoshop, but in other programs, it's called the sub-selection tool. It does the exact same thing. They can be a little confusing that they're named different things, but they're the exact same tool. So the direct selection tool in Illustrator is this one. It is the just the plain white arrow tool, and this allows you to select anchor points. And so I'm going to show you that the original photo is still there. It's just masked. So if I click on this anchor point and move it, you can see the rest of the background is still there. And it behaves the same way in Adobe InDesign when you are masking out, when you're wanting to create a customized image frame. So that's how that works. And so that example that you saw of Dayang's with that fluid-looking element at the top, that free-form line, and then those pictures were placed in there. So she just lined those pictures up, in those columns like she had them. And then she just drew this element to serve as a frame, to hold those elements, and also to use as a clipping mask to get rid of the straight bottom of them, you know, so that they're not just columns of rectangular photographs all the same height and dimensions, but it makes it more interesting at the bottom when there's that curvature, you know, with such strict alignment of those photo elements. That curve kind of breaks up the stuffiness of that. So, and she did that with a clipping mask. And so this is how you create a clipping mask in Illustrator. Okay, another question I just had was, how can you separate these social media icons? Because when I put those in the resource files folder, I just kind of lumped up all the most popular ones together, and you could use which ones you wanted to use. Now, if you're in Illustrator, you really can't break these up unless you want to create a special kind of clipping mask that excludes the others. But that would only work if you have like 3 or 4 in a row, you know, consecutively, and then you could mask out the others, and it would probably be okay. But a better way to go about doing this is in Photoshop. So I just placed that resource file into this document, and the reason why this is a better way to go in Photoshop is because you can also change the color of these icons as well in Photoshop. And so now that we're working with pixels, we can use the eraser tool or even one of these shape selection marquee tools to select, you know, one element.
I crop.
Huh?
I crop mine.
You cropped yours?
Yeah.
On
that's
purpose?
how I did 4 of them.
Oh, is that how you did? Oh, you can crop them, sure.
Crop them. Yeah, I didn't do that.
But I would just erase the ones that I don't need. I mean, that's how I would separate those. Or I need a different, it's not going to let me do it at the board, so I'll do it down here. Oh, and my social media icons need to be rasterized. So right now they're smart objects, so I couldn't like select these, and I mean I can make a selection marquee box, but it's not going to let me select this object and move it. But if I rasterize it, then I can. So I'm going to Command D to deselect that, and I'm going to rasterize this social media icons layer. And now these are rasterized objects. And so if I want to just select a few of them to use, like maybe Facebook, I can use this selection marquee tool to put a selection bounding box around it. And then I can grab my move tool. Oops. I need to zoom in so I can actually grab that. And then I can move this icon and place it wherever I want. Now notice that it has these marching ants around it. That's what I'll call these. That just means that all these pixels are selected. But when it's in that mode, if I want to choose a different color other than black, then I can just apply a different color inside of that selected space. And I could do that by using the paintbrush to just paint in another color. Or I could use the paint bucket tool to choose a different color to just pour in there, as long as that selection is still active. So with that selection active, I can just pour another color in there. So all you do is just, after you, if you want to take them from Photoshop to Illustrator, then prepare them in Photoshop for the way you want them to look, okay? And preferably have them all on one layer, if you can do that, when it's all said and done. And then just select the content of that layer, just do a simple copy and paste. And that will paste it into Illustrator, but it will just be a static image. It won't be a vector art image. So you can copy and paste into those two programs. Yeah. But this, Photoshop would do the best job for what you're wanting to do with those icons. If you want to separate them from the rest of that group and change their colors or scale or whatever, to me, that would be the best way to do it.